At some point, intelligence stops arguing. Not because it was proven wrong, not because it lost the debate, not because it ran out of arguments, but because it learned something more important. It learned that truth does not always win, that clarity is not always rewarded, and that being right can quietly make you expensive. Speaking has a cost, not immediately, not visibly, but cumulatively. Every explanation creates friction. Every question slows the process. Every correction disrupts the flow. And systems don't like disruption. They like predictability. So intelligence begins to notice something. Silence is cheaper, not safer, not nobler, just cheaper. This is the moment when intelligence stops trying to convince, stops trying to clarify, stops trying to improve what does not want to be improved. This is not defeat. This is not fear. This is adaptation. This is the moment. Intelligence learns to stay quiet. Intelligent people don't start in silence. They start by speaking. They explain what others overlook. They connect details that don't quite fit. They slow things down just enough to make sense of them. They clarify not to dominate, but to improve. They point out inconsistencies because they assume consistency matters. They offer improvements because they assume systems want to work better. They assume the system is rational. They assume insight will be welcomed. They assume accuracy is a shared value. At first, nothing seems wrong. No one shuts them down. No one openly disagrees. No one tells them to stop. They are listened to. They are thanked. They are included. They are allowed to speak. And that is why it takes time to notice what is happening. Because nothing breaks. No doors close. No conflicts erupt. No warnings appear. Everything stays polite, professional, reasonable. And that is exactly what makes it confusing. If nothing is wrong, why does speaking start to feel heavier? Why do explanations begin to stretch the room? Why do questions linger longer than answers? Why does clarity slowly stop creating movement? This is the moment most people miss. Because the system doesn't resist intelligence, it absorbs it. And while intelligence is still speaking, something else is already changing. The first lesson intelligence learns is not rejection. Rejection would at least be honest. It is indifference. Ideas are acknowledged, then quietly removed from the process. Questions are answered politely, then strategically avoided. Suggestions are written down, then never revisited. Everything looks functional. Nothing looks hostile. Nothing dramatic happens. No conflict, no confrontation, no punishment. And that is the lesson. Because indifference doesn't feel like resistance, it feels like cooperation. The system doesn't tell intelligence it is wrong. It lets it speak, while continuing exactly as before. There is no argument to win, no position to defend, no moment to push against. The system does not need to defeat intelligence. It only needs to outlast it. And it always has more time. The second lesson comes quietly. Not as a warning, not as a decision, not as a single moment. It comes as a pattern. Intelligent people begin to notice small shifts. Meetings they used to be invited to happen without them. Conversations continue after they leave the room. Decisions are made before questions are fully asked. The more they explain, the less they are included. The more they clarify, the more their presence is described as complicated. The more precisely they speak, the more they disrupt the rhythm. And systems value rhythm more than accuracy. Unpredictability has a price, not a visible one, Opportunities don't disappear. They just arrive later. Access doesn't close. It becomes conditional. Security isn't taken away. It becomes temporary. Nothing is removed. Everything is adjusted. And adjustment is harder to challenge than exclusion. The system doesn't silence intelligence. It slowly prices it out. This is where adaptation begins. Not as fear, not as burnout, not as defeat, as calculation. A quiet one. Intelligent people don't suddenly withdraw. They don't disengage. They don't stop caring. They start measuring. They notice how much energy each sentence costs, how much explanation is required to be understood, how often clarity produces resistance instead of movement. They don't stop seeing what is wrong. Their awareness sharpens. They see outcomes before they happen. They recognize patterns before they repeat. They anticipate consequences before words leave their mouth. And something changes, not externally, internally. They begin to sort their thoughts. Some questions are worth asking. Others are simply expensive. Some observations improve things. Others only increase friction. Some truths illuminate reality. Others destabilize structures that survive by staying opaque. So intelligence adapts. Not by lying. Not by pretending. By selecting. They speak less. They explain less. They correct less. Not because they can't, but because they've learned the exchange rate. They know which sentences require too much justification, which insights create visibility without protection, which forms of honesty reduce stability without producing change. Silence becomes efficient. Not comfortable, not ideal, efficient. They don't stop thinking, they stop saying. And here is the part most people miss. This silence is not empty. It is full of withheld clarity, unspoken corrections, unused insight. And the system feels it. Because when intelligence stops speaking, something else begins to disappear. From the outside, it looks like maturity, professionalism, emotional intelligence, knowing when not to speak, being easy to work with. It looks like growth, like balance, like control. It looks clean. From the inside, it feels different. It feels like compression, like taking something expansive and folding it inward, like holding insight just beneath the surface to avoid unnecessary cost. Thoughts don't disappear, they condense. Questions don't vanish, they stack. Clarity doesn't leave, it tightens. This is not silence as weakness. This is not withdrawal. This is silence as adaptation. A deliberate narrowing of expression to preserve position. A controlled reduction of voice to maintain stability. Nothing is lost. Everything is contained. And when intelligence contains itself long enough, systems begin to change around it. But something important happens when intelligence goes quiet. At first, it feels harmless, even efficient. Systems stop receiving resistance, and nothing immediately breaks. Feedback loops thin out, then disappear. Questions stop arriving. Corrections stop interrupting. Alternative paths quietly fade. What remains is what fits. Predictable behavior, smooth compliance, low-friction performance. Everything moves faster. Meetings are shorter. Decisions feel easier. The system stabilizes. And stability feels like success. But this stability is not improvement. It is compression without opposition. Because when no one corrects the direction, speed replaces accuracy. When no one interrupts the flow, momentum replaces judgment. The system keeps moving, not because it is better, but because nothing challenges it anymore. And over time, even those inside it forget. what resistance ever felt like. And systems without resistance don't evolve. They settle. This is the hidden cost. When intelligence learns to stay quiet, systems don't improve. They harden. They become less curious, less responsive, less alive. And the silence feels justified because everything keeps functioning. Deadlines are met. Processes run smoothly. Nothing appears broken. The system works, at least at first. This is not about losing your voice, and it is not about fear. It is about learning, the economics of speaking, about understanding which words create cost without creating change. And once intelligence learns that lesson, it never forgets the price.